Every year, thousands of people visit the Italian city of Florence to experience its unrivalled collections of Italian art. Some of them are so overwhelmed they become agitated, confused, or pass out and get stretchered off to hospital. Most are released after a quick checkup, but some remain unwell for several days and seem to have developed a strange mental illness, which has been called Stendhal Syndrome. I'm Professor Graeme Yorston, and today I'm going to be exploring the fascinating question of whether too much art can make you ill, or even make you go mad, by looking into Stendhal Syndrome. The term was coined by Dr. Graziella Magarini, head of psychiatry at the Ospedale Santa Maria Nuova in Florence, one of the oldest hospitals in Europe, where, amongst other things, Leonardo da Vinci carried out his human dissections. Dr. Magarini noticed that many of the foreign tourists who were visiting the city's art galleries and churches were struck down by a mysterious set of symptoms, including anxiety, mood changes, and psychosis. She published her observations in a 1989 book, The Stendhal Syndrome, naming it after the 19th century French author Stendhal, who described his experience of visiting a church in Florence in 1811, the Basilica of Santa Croce, where Machiavelli, Michelangelo, and Galileo are buried. While sitting on a stool and tilting his head back to take in the frescoes of the vault of the Niccolini Chapel, he was overcome with profound emotion, writing, "I was in a sort of ecstasy from the idea of being in Florence, close to the great men whose tombs I had seen, absorbed in the contemplation of sublime beauty. I reached the point where one encounters celestial sensations. Everything spoke so vividly to my soul. I had palpitations of the heart. Life was drained from me. I walked with the fear of falling."
Allora, a un certo momento.
In her book, Dr. Magarini describes over 100 cases of people similarly overwhelmed by the unrelenting barrage of Renaissance art and culture. The condition has a sudden onset and lasts from 2 to 8 days, and is characterized by anxiety and other physical symptoms such as sweating, palpitations, chest pain and muscular weakness, or serious psychological symptoms such as mood changes, thought disorder, paranoia, alterations of the sense of reality described as feelings of strangeness or alienation, altered perception of sounds and colours, and delusions of persecution. Some become so agitated and confused that they try to damage the very works of art that they have come to see. The psychological profile of those affected is that they are young, single, sensitive, impressionable, and travelling alone or with one other person. Around a half have a prior history of psychiatric disorder, and many either regard themselves as artists or have a keen interest in art.
Pazienti esplicitano in maniera dilatata.
In her book, Dr. Magarini draws some interesting conclusions about the effects of art on the psyche, suggesting that in some people the art experience hooks a repressed trauma and pulls it rapidly to the surface, making the subject act like a distressed fish out of water. She describes her job as unhooking the patient from this trauma and gently placing them back into society. Awareness of the condition was increased by Dario Argento's 1996 film, The Stendhal Syndrome.
A new film by the master of the psychological thriller, Dario Argento.
And the director has spoken of how he experienced the phenomenon when he visited the Parthenon in Athens as a child and became lost from his parents for several hours. Sigmund Freud had a similar experience on a trip to Athens, and Carl Jung described how, as an old man, he decided to go to Rome, something he had wanted to do all his life but had put off, fearing the emotional impact of the visit could overwhelm him. On entering a travel agent in Zurich to buy his ticket to Rome, he fainted, and he never made the trip. It has been suggested that the Russian writer Fyodor Dostoevsky experienced a similar phenomenon in 1867 when viewing the painting of the Dead Christ by the German artist Hans Holbein in a museum in Switzerland. Dostoevsky had temporal lobe epilepsy, which occasionally generalised to full-blown tonic-clonic seizures, and many of the characters in his novels also have epilepsy, at a time when epilepsy was generally viewed with suspicion and as a marker of hereditary degeneracy. According to his wife's diary,
"He remained standing in front of it as if stunned. I did not have the strength to look at him. It was very painful for me, especially in my sickly state of pregnancy, and I went to other rooms. When I returned after 15 or 20 minutes, I found him stuck in the same place, in front of the painting. His agitated face presented a kind of fear, something that I had noted more than once before in the first moments of an epileptic attack. I calmly took my husband by the arm, led him to another room and sat him down on a bench, expecting the attack at any moment. Thankfully, this did not happen. He calmed down little by little and left the museum, but he insisted on going back there again to see this painting that had impressed him so much."
Paintings play an important role in Dostoevsky's novels, and his reaction to the Holbein painting was not unusual for him, as he went into ecstatic states in front of other religious pictures on his travels. But was Dostoevsky's experience the same as Dr. Magherini's patients? Neuroscientists have been studying the brains of people meditating or in ecstatic states for many years. Recent functional brain imaging and advanced neurophysiological EEG studies with intracranial electrodes in people with ecstatic epilepsy, orgasmic epilepsy, or epilepsy triggered by music have improved our understanding of these mental states, which seem to be associated with an activation of the anterior insular cortex and the salience network, a crucial brain system that is involved in self-awareness and social behaviour. It has been postulated that Stendhal Syndrome could be triggered by a similar phenomenon, but we don't know if this applies to any or all of the cases, as there have been no psychiatric studies of people actually suffering from the condition. Stendhal Syndrome isn't unique to Florence. It has been reported in other cities such as Paris and Jerusalem, where people seem to have been overcome with religious ecstasy rather than being transported by art. But not everyone is convinced that Stendhal Syndrome exists at all, and it does not appear as a specific disorder in the international psychiatric classification systems. It has been explained away as simple anxiety, heat exhaustion, or a modern version of an attack of the vapours. It has even been suggested that Stendhal's own experience may have been a little embellished. He was a novelist after all. Julian Barnes, in his book on death, Nothing to be Frightened of, points out that Stendhal's description of his trip to Florence in his 1811 diary is very different to the account in the published version of his travels, which appeared many years later. In his diary, rather than ecstatic responses to art, he writes of being dead tired and having swollen feet from his new boots being too tight. So what is going on in the brains of people with this condition? I don't think we can answer that question with any certainty, as there are far more articles about Stendhal Syndrome in art and travel magazines than studies in medical journals. Presumably, as the idea that art has the power to overcome rationality is kind of attractive to arty types. Some cases could be linked to epilepsy and perhaps narcolepsy and cataplexy, attacks of which can be triggered by intense emotions. And some of the case descriptions are suggestive of dissociative states. It also struck me that some people tilting their heads back to admire the sculptures may be constricting the arteries at the back of their neck, resulting in vertebrobasilar syndrome, which can include any of these symptoms: vertigo, dizziness, fainting, drop attacks, double vision, loss of vision, pins and needles, confusion, loss of speech, headache, altered consciousness, unsteadiness, motor weakness, loss of temperature and pain sensation, incontinence. So, can too much art make you ill? Can it make you go mad? Well, yes, it seems it can cause a transient psychotic episode, if you're predisposed and of a sensitive nature. Fortunately, The treatment is simple: rest and taking a few days off from the art. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe and click the notifications bell to be kept up to date with all the latest videos. See you again soon.